Our political leaders will only know our priorities if we tell them about it again and again and again, and only if it shows up in the polls. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation, and our topic of discussion today, of course, is elections. Is Sri Lanka really going to have a local government election? Is Sri Lanka even headed towards maybe a general election? Because the president will be empowered after the month of January to dissolve parliament as per the constitution. But, however, the president has said that he will do no such thing. To discuss these matters and more, we've got, as usual, an eminent panel of guests, getting right down to it. Starting from the left, we have Arun Hemachandra, the National Executive Committee member of the National People's Power Movement, or the NPP. And on to his left, we have Rehan Jayavikrama, Vice Chairman of the Samagi Jana Balavegeya Youth. On his left, we have Rohan Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFRL. And we've also got, for the first time, I believe, on Face the Nation, Attorney Kaushalya Rajapaksa, Founding Director of the Yehelia Foundation. Thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedules and joining us on our program today. Very quickly, the first round is, of course, for the opening statements. Each of our participants or our panelists will get 4 minutes to make their opening statements. Well, the topic of discussion really is elections, and I presume that each and every one of our panelists will have a lot to say on this subject. So let's get right with it. Arun?
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank TV1 for hosting this beautiful show. And let me start it like this. Now, elections are the key aspect to show that this country is a democratic country. And as you see, already the provincial council elections are due by, I think, around 5 years. And now we have this crisis going on in order to postpone the local government elections. And our rulers, they always, they looked at it in a different way, because, they always hold elections whenever it's easy for them to win. They hold the elections whenever it's, more favorable for them to, form the government or whatever. But when it is not favorable for them, they use some kind of trick to divert people's mindset and to postpone the elections. So I think this happened in the past also. In 80s that happened. They went for a referendum instead of an election. And again, that happened several times. And during Rajapaksa eras, elections were preponed, not postponed, whenever the situation was, more favorable for them to, win. They brought the election much earlier than when it's supposed to be held. So this is not what democracy is. I think we should stick to some strict rules and regulations and some norms and values. Now, I was in Philippines, and following Marcos era, they came up with some certain fixed dates for the elections. In some occasions, we came across so many elections held on one single day, because that won't be influencing on the other results. If you have, each and every countries have their own set of regulations. But the most important problem is we don't have any regulations. That's the most serious issue here. So a couple of months back, people got onto the streets. They protested. Not only, they protested against not only the corruption and other things. Also, they wanted some kind of change in the political culture, wherein, that was one of the main aspects, that was one of the main requests, that was one of the main demands by the protesters. But still, if our rulers have not learned from that, I think there will be more protests in the future. Because, if they are trying to play everything within the legal framework, we should understand one thing, that the legal framework has not been the same throughout the history. At some point in the history, constitutionally, what Hitler did was right. Constitutionally. Right? He brought amendments, he brought so many new legal points in the parliament or whatever, the Senate or wherever. He was legally right. But you should understand one thing, even slavery was legal at some point. it's not something, about what is legal. What we should see is whether it's justifiable. Just and legal both are different. It's not, we interpret the law and, we just try to come up with some legal answer for some serious problem. So, but they can come up with some legal answer. Like, for example, in other countries, when there are serious protests, like what we had in the past, soon after the protest, there will be an election. The mandate will be renewed in some way. But disappointingly, in Sri Lanka, that did not happen. The slogan was not complete. Though they said, "Gota, go home," the second part was not, we want election or some other part was not added. That was not adequate.
So this is the mistake of the Aragalaya?
Not exactly, but it was not a mistake, but something was missing. I'm not trying to blame anybody here, but then again, something was missing. So that missing link should be found, actually. So what really happens is now if you take countries like UK, prime ministers, they step down. Because that's, if you take the UK, I saw in some debates, they were making use of certain bad examples, wrong examples. Now one SLPP parliamentarian, he was quoting UK. Now UK is parliament supremacy. It's parliament supremacy, which is completely different from the constitutional supremacy that we have in this country. Because why we have a constitutional supremacy is because we don't have trust in the parliament supremacy. Because there I have not seen any prime minister who stepped down to courts again as prime minister. If I'm wrong, just correct me. If a prime minister stepped down, because I think we have seen several prime ministers who stepped down in the past, especially with the Brexit issues and things like that. They stepped down, but again they did not come up with some of the excuses, and they did not make some kind of a whatever. Some excuses to get into the parliament again and to be the leader of whatever the country or whatever. They did not. But here we are making use of those examples as wrong examples, and they are trying to find some loopholes. So though the president was, I don't accept him as the president. Constitutionally, he may be the president. He made use of several loopholes in the legal framework, and he became the president. So okay, he's the president. But then again, what should have happened was he could have gone for an election. And not having funds and all these things are, those are rubbish. The people, there are ample funds, and even if they say to the Sri Lankan community that they don't have funds, they can generate funds. So, but here what they were trying to do is, they were trying to divert people's mindset, and now they have come up with some committees or conferences to solve the national conflict issues and whatever. So they're trying to divert the real story. But whatever said and done, the provincial council elections are, they were supposed to be held a couple of years back, not held, due to the legal deadlock situation that we have. And now again they are trying to make a deadlock situation for the local government elections. And all of a sudden he came up and said, the number of councillors are more, that and this. And he was the one who brought this reform. The reform was brought in during his era as the Prime Minister during 2015 to 2019. So
and
he brought
Arun,
up that.
Also, it was Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena who headed the committee, I believe, that tabled the proposal. We will get into in-depth discussion regarding, of course, the finances that are required for holding an election, and if or not Sri Lanka really does have these finances. Moving on, Rehan Jayavikrama, Vice Chairman of the SJB Youth. Judging by your position, what do you think the youth's perspective is on elections?
I think first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on Face the Nation. It's good to be on this new format. So I think the youth played a huge role in the Aragalaya, right? If you saw the youth participation in the Aragalaya, you would have seen that it was an all-time high. It was just not normal participation. There were thousands and thousands of youth who were actively involved in the Aragalaya. So I would say that the Ranil Wickremesinghe presidency is a direct result of the Aragalaya. You can't say it was not because it was because of the Aragalaya that Gotabaya Rajapaksa had to resign. And it's because of his resignation that the SLPP then appointed the president, the current president, make no mistake, he was appointed by the SLPP. And what they could have done right now was something that the youth wanted, was system change. It was, the entire Aragale was based on system change. They wanted a different kind of politician, they wanted a different style of governance, they wanted the Rajapakshas out, they didn't want them holding any sort of position. And effectively, it was not just an Aragale against the president, it was also condemnation. It was a condemnation of their manifesto, the SLP manifesto. So it was just not the president. It was also they also denounced SLPP and said that they are not with the SLPP's policies anymore. So what they could have done, what the government could have done, was that if they, now this famous phrase that you hear now is that they did it for the sake of the people, right? So there is another way of looking at it. What they could have done if it was for the sake of the people was to reach an agreement with the SLPP and say, look, we can only appoint a very limited cabinet. We can't accommodate everyone. Let's just get this IMF thing going. And once the IMF bailout package, once the first step is done, not a pre-draft, but once they start disbursing the funds, then let's go in for a general election. Because a general election, whether we like it or not, it's a mandate for the people, right? The people have to decide who they should be governed by. For example, I should decide who I need to pay tax to, or under which governance system I need to pay tax to. And that requires a mandate, that requires public support. And sadly, when you see the cabinet that's been appointed, when you see that the only real change in this government is that of the president, and that there has been no meaningful things that have been done, when half the cabinet or more, the most amount of members in the cabinet are people in the SLPP. Now they'll obviously say, why didn't the SJB or why didn't the JVP take it? I don't know the JVP's reasoning behind, or the NPP's reasoning behind not taking it, but Sajid Premadas's theory was, how can you take oath before someone who has been, when they ask him why he was on the white index of the prime ministership, how do you morally stand in front of someone that's ruined the country and take oath? It's not something that easy. And how can you work with people whose morals and whose integrity is very different to the ideologies that you believe in or your party believes in? So that was not possible, right? And now when you look at the effects, or when you look at the effects of what's actually going on, look at the massive scale human rights allegations that are going around. The enforcement of the PTA against people with politically different ideologies. And it's interesting to note that the PTA has been very rarely used in Sri Lanka to actually catch terrorists. It's been used to stiffen dissent, right? That's what it's used for. And when you see the fact that, okay, let's say you're the IMF and you want to give Sri Lanka money, but under what conditions do you actually give them money? How reasonable is it for the IMF to give money to a government that spends, for example, $518 billion on rupees, 518 billion rupees on the defense budget, higher than education and health, the two sectors where we need it the most, or welfare. So what sort of faith will the IMF have? Then, like I said, the use of the PTA, what sort of faith will the IMF have for that? And the fact that the government keeps on lying about when this disbursement is going to happen, that's another weird thing, right? Because they said we're going to get it by October. They later said November. And now Shehan Semasinghe says that we won't even get it in December. And talks are still going on, which means that the IMF, as of now, they've not agreed whether it should be given to Sri Lanka or not. So that's the main reason why we have to go for election. Because the people need to believe that the regime that they're paying their taxes to is an honest regime. Or it's a regime, can't really call it a regime, a government that's going to, what we have right now is a regime, but they want a government where, you can trust your representatives and name me one other country that is not run by authoritarianism which postpones elections the way that Sri Lanka has done. Elections, or when we are supposed to have it, shouldn't even be a choice that's rested in the hand of a politician. It should be solely with the Elections Commission, and that's how it's got to be. The government can't choose when to have elections, but in Sri Lanka they keep on doing it. Like Arun said, the Rajapakshas They boldly claim that they always had elections, but they forget to say that they had elections when it suited them. That also shouldn't be the case. If you have 5 years, for example, for a term, for a general election, that 5 years has to run. Or when the president says that he's not going to have a general election, that's bunkum as well, because by the time I think we get to March or January, February, a simple majority in parliament can request the speaker or request the president to hold an early general election. But the fact that he is saying that he's not going to have elections shows how dictatorial that he really is. He's not an actual liberal. He's a dictator. He's a soft. You can't really call him a soft dictator as well, because the way he ran the United National Party since 1994, and to be its leader without a single seat, is the same way that he's running and managing the country right now.
Well, Rehan, you need to take full responsibility for all the statements that you are making, because, of course, we do not have a representative from the United National Party present here today. But just to keep our viewers informed, we extended invitations to all of the major parties in Sri Lanka. We requested representation on our show this evening. However, unfortunately, for personal reasons or other reasons, they are not present here today, and the invitations were declined to a certain degree. Moving on, of course, to a specialist in elections, a man who's been working on the election systems and knows the ins and out of the elections here in Sri Lanka, the executive director of PAFREL, Mr. Hettiarachchi. What do you think of elections in Sri Lanka?
I think legally, within the legal framework of existing legal framework of this country, elections should take place before 19th of March. I have checked with, in a sense, PAFREL has checked with the Election Commission. So we officially get the confirmations that they have to have elections at least 3 weeks prior to the 19th of March. So that means the election should take place somewhere in February. So it could be either 25th or 26th of February. Election should take place according to the Elections Commission calendar. And there is again the Local Government Acts has given the real time frame. So the nomination period will be, so once you declare the elections, we have to give actually we have to give 2 weeks for preparations of nominations for the political party. And for the nominations, they have to give 3.5 days. And for the campaign, so minimum time frame is 5 weeks, but they can go up to the 7 weeks. So it's a discretion of the Elections Commission. So if you look at the minimum time frame, there will be 52 days. So you have to calculate from 26th of February, you have to calculate either 52 days or the maximum if you look at 65 days. So meaning election should declare, if they take the full period, they have to declare somewhere around December 3rd week. So if you take minimum time frame, so they can go up to early January. So this is the legal framework. There is no option for elections commissions. They have to declare within the given time frame. So that is, they are duty bound to do that. But as my colleague mentions, unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, always the ruling party, whoever run in the country, so they take this advantage for election calendar, because we don't have an election calendar as such in this country. So we are demanding over the decades now to have an election calendar. And as Arun correctly said, I was witness in recent Philippine elections. There were 5 elections took place in a single day. But that's a different story. But there are some countries, most of the countries, not some actually, most of the countries, they have their election calendar. But here in Sri Lanka, we don't have an election calendar. So whoever run in the country, they take the advantage. We can remember during Rajapaksa's regime, actually they had elections, but they had staggered elections. So local council elections, they had elections in 3 different time frames, because they start with one local or several local councils. Once they get success, they go for a second stage. The provincial council also, they did the same. But the Yahapalana government, we can remember, they postponed local elections, due to the delimitation issue. Actually, they would have done it within a short period, but unfortunately, they took it 2 years to complete the delimitations. As PAFL, we had to go to court, and we got the court order. Then again, we can remember during the same, the president, he was in the prime minister at that time, they brought up 20th amendment at that time. That's a different 20th amendment. So they tried to, using that, they tried to postpone the provincial election. So we went to the court, and then finally the government has to withdraw their bill. Later, in the same year, they brought this women's quota for provincial council system. So we all appreciate, because we work for women's quota. Nobody challenged it. But it ended up, it was 2-page document, 2-page proposal for women's quota, but it ended up with 32 pages, completely new electoral system. Now there's no provincial elections now. So almost 5 years. They were not able to complete the delimitations again. That also part of the responsibility of present Prime Minister, because according to the local Provincial Council Act, if the delimitation is not passed by the Parliament, there was a provisions to appoint the committee headed by Prime Minister. So the present President was the Prime Minister at that time. He was the chair of the that committee, but they did not complete their tasks during the given time frame. But unfortunately, 1 day before they complete, we do not know whether they have met each other and whether they have completed their tasks. But 1 day before they complete their task or submit their report to the President dissolve the Parliament. You can remember we talk about 52 days. Honorable President at that time, Maithripala Sirisena. So this is what happened in the past. So in this country, always political party take their advantage having elections or not having elections. Fortunately, they can't hold staggered election for Parliament. Otherwise, they will do the same for Parliament elections also, because it's not valid. They can't have a staggered system for presidential elections. So therefore, they have to have a 1-day elections. Otherwise, the government, we have enough experience in Sri Lankan electoral reforms or constitutional reforms. Always they use this reform for their advantage.
So despite which government comes into power, even if there is a loophole in the system, they will use it for their advantage. So that is what
they have shown us over the past decades, whether it is a UNP government, because so far we have only UNP, Podujana Peramuna and Sri Lanka Freedom Party. So they have given that example for us. So we don't have trust with the government. Not only the present government, even the previous government. That is the biggest problem in this country. Even in this economic crisis, we can't resolve because people don't trust with the government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hettiarachchi. We will delve deeper into the points that you mentioned throughout our discussion. Last and certainly not least, we have attorney Naushalya Rajapaksa, the founding director of the Yeheliya Foundation. Naushalya, we've been speaking about women's representation in Sri Lanka for a long time, but I think as Mr. Hettiarachchi pointed out, this issue of women's representation was used as another pawn in the political game to postpone elections, to prevent elections from taking place in the right time. We had a Aragalaya taking place in Sri Lanka, and we saw how women in Sri Lanka, brave women in Sri Lanka, came forward and protested for their rights, and they continue to lead the fight even amidst this economic crisis. So you've worked with a lot of women in Sri Lanka, and judging from the perspective of women, what is the feeling like among the women in Sri Lanka when it comes to holding elections?
Thank you, Shalan, for that question. And in fact, I must thank the Face the Nation team for inviting me on board on behalf of the Yeheliya Foundation. Well, if I am to give an introduction about the legal framework, because I believe even Arun and Rehan and even Mr. Hettiarachchi spoke of how constitutionally we must hold elections. Shalan, to begin with, what we need to understand is the sovereignty of this country lies with the people. And one of the ways in which the sovereignty is exercised is by actually the legislative power of the people is exercised is by electing members of parliament to this particular parliament, right? So what we need to understand is how can then people exercise their legislative power if an election is not being held? That's the first question. So basically, this, I mean, any government, so to say, I'm not privy to speak of politics, so to say, but then all I could say is a government who doesn't want to hold elections, and if they are deliberately sort of postponing elections, I would say here then we have a situation where the people's sovereignty has been violated. And not just that, I'm not going to limit myself to Article 4 of the Constitution. I'm just going to base myself on the Constitution per se, because this question came up as to whether this is constitutional, right? And even if you look at some of the directive principles of state policy, which the Parliament is bound to sort of follow and exercise, you will see under Article 27, subsection 4, if I may read it, it very clearly says that the democratic rights of the people should be decentralized by the administration and by affording all possible opportunities to the people to participate at every level in national life and in government. So now, how can people take part in this decision making if they are not given a chance to vote? For an example, I'm looking at Article 27(4) of the Directive Principles. So it's not generally a women's issue or like a men's issue. I think in general, if we are to speak, it's an issue of the citizens not being able to exercise their right of franchise, their sovereignty, so to say. And if we don't have elections, and especially even if you look at some of the articles in the Constitution, once again I'm limiting myself to the Constitution per se, the Fundamental Rights chapter very clearly under Article 12 speaks of right to equality, and under which Article 12 subsection 4 very clearly speaks of how the government must make laws. Nothing must prevent the government in making laws to sort of advance the welfare of women, children and the disabled community. Right? So we have all sorts, we have a very good legal framework. No one can say that we don't have adequate provisions in the legal framework to sort of advance the rights of women, so to say. But the question is, what really happens when these laws are being implemented? Right? There seems to be some sort of a lacuna, some sort of a gap that sort of hinders their participation, especially in these governance structures, in the political infrastructure of our country. Right? I'm not limiting myself to the parliament, so to say, but even if you look at the local government, even if you look at the provincial councils, even if you look at the parliament, what really happens then? Because here we have the laws, we also have a legislative, we also have a mandatory quota system that should allow women to come on board. But then are these really effective? Well, we can talk about it certainly as we go along. But the question is, are these effective? Are women now sort of promoted to come into politics and to govern the country, so to say? Because at the end of the day, women are the 52% of this population consists of women in this country, fortunately, right? But then are they being reflected in a parliament of 225 elected members, out of which we have only less than 6% of women? And in Sri Lanka, I mean, if you take the Sri Lankan context, in 1931, we got the universal franchise. 17 years, I believe about 17 years before independence also. Right? And soon after, 29 years afterwards, after getting the universal franchise in this country, we produced the first female head of state in the world. Right? So we are a country of that nature. Nobody can say that we've never had sort of substantial female participation in these governance structures, and that this is sort of like an alien, like a topic that we've never spoken of. But there has to be a reason. I think we must also try and understand why women aren't effectively participating in all of these political structures that we spoke of, what really hinders them, and what can be done about it.
Now, shall I just, the question that I initially posed to you, what is the sentiment like among women when it comes to, because the only way that they can, meet this standard that you speak of, having more representation, 52%, let's have representation in parliament and other governing bodies reflective of this. What is, they need an election to do that.
Certainly.
And we've seen that when it comes to parliament and policy making for women, especially on issues like maybe simple issues like wearing a sari to work, and issues such as sanitary napkins, the taxes were increased to such a level, but it was brought down afterwards. But being sensitive to these issues, how eager are the women in our community to see an election?
Certainly they are eager to see an election so that they could themselves sort of cast a vote and elect the sort of representatives that they think are apt and capable enough to sort of voice their concerns, if you take the parliament, in the parliament, so to say. But if you speak in the aspect of women who would want to contest in the upcoming elections, I don't think they are prepared both financially and in other means to sort of face an election, so to say, because We are living in a country where we have no cap on campaign financing, we have no laws on sort of welfare politics, we know that votes can be bought. I mean, that's a sort of general norm that exists in our society. So in those sort of aspects, without really, enhancing their capacities in this sense, I don't think women are ready to, so to say, face an election and contest. Because as Mr. Hettiarachchi said, we have literally a couple of months, so to say, to prepare ourselves for an election. I don't think women would be ready within such a limited period of time, given the cultural and other sort of barriers that women usually face. But I believe that women would certainly, I mean, as a woman, I myself would want to have an election in this country so that we could certainly voice our opinion and exercise our sovereignty.
Now, shall there come an election, would you run?
Definitely not.
Thank you very much, Naushalia. We will get into more on this matter as we progress. But before we do that, a little bit of an introduction on the journalist on our panel tonight. On my immediate right, we have Shania Dedigamma, no stranger to the show. On my left also, we've got Jayamal Ratnayaka, no stranger to the show. But on my far left, we've got a debutante on Face the Nation, a lady whose brains match up to her beauty, none other than Mariam Gunavijaya. So welcome, Mariam, to Face the Nation. And this is your chance.
I'd like to pose my first question to Mr. Jayavikrama. You spoke about the people's mandate, and you said that the people want a leader that they choose. As a young politician who represents the youth population in the country, how important do you think the elections are for Sri Lanka, for the youth of Sri Lanka? And how is this elections or no election situation affecting them?
I think I'm not just going to draw a parallel. By the way, all the best on your first day on the show.
Thank you.
Hope it all goes well. So I don't think we should draw a parallel between the youth and the women population or the aging population. We should all look at it as the country needs an election. It's not just one segment that needs an election. The entire country needs one. And it's a democratically correct thing for there to be elections. It's not something that the people should be asking for as a favor. It's not something that we need to come on this show and request the government to hold elections. I mean, they are morally obliged to have elections.
Only morally?
Morally, legally, ethically, a huge multitude of things. It's just the right thing to do. There shouldn't be a law around it. There shouldn't be a way for the politicians to, decide when and if to have elections. That should be completely taken away from them. That's why we are called a sovereign country, like what Naushalia said when she always used the word sovereign. Sovereignty also means for the people's right to be able to vote for who they want. And I agree with something that Arun said, which is that Ranil Wickremesinghe, the current president, he's not my president. And I don't think he's Sri Lanka's president. I just think he's an SLPP president, appointed by the SLPP and not by the people. So I'll get that out of the way first. So he actually had ample opportunity to introduce reforms to this country, electoral reforms. A lot of people say, yeah, well, he's been Prime Minister only a few times, but he's also been an MP, right? And he could have always brought in a private member's motion. And even with
there for more than 45 years now in the parliament.
In the parliament. And it's only now, a few months before the election is held, that he tries to think of all these new ways to postpone elections. So he talks about increased female representation, he speaks about a lower amount of members, speaks about he already appoints a delimitation committee to sort of alter the ward system that his government is part of introducing during the Hapalne time. So we got to ask ourselves, why is he doing it? He's obviously doing it to postpone elections. So that's what the people of this country need to understand. They need to understand that this government is deliberately wanting to postpone elections. So I mean, that's something that the people should figure out. Now, how do we go about it? Now, there are two ways. One is for electorates to force their lawmakers or to convince their lawmakers that even if the president doesn't dissolve parliament, I'm not talking about local government elections, by the way, because I just don't think we should even talk about how it should be and when it should be called, because legally it's supposed to be held. The Elections Commission has said that the Gazette is going to be published for the nominations, and let's just stick to that, right? But apart from the local government election, legislation can only be changed and possibly legislation can be brought only in parliament. And the people have lost their faith in the existing representatives in parliament right now.
But then, Rehan, since you said, the local government elections should be held at this date legally, one can, propound the argument that this government, this parliament, was elected for a period of 5 years, and then their election should be held legally at the end of that 5 years.
I don't think that's correct, because if we are going to judge by the constitution, there's a constitutional provision for presidents who don't want to have elections. And that's exactly why Parliament has a provision where after a certain amount of time, a simple majority of members in Parliament can request the president to hold elections. Now, that rule or that law is there for moments like this. So the president, the lawmakers, will have to be answerable to the people when they ask them, why didn't any of you want to call in for a simple majority?
So is the SJB planning on passing a motion like this in Parliament?
I think the SJB, I think we are waiting for that stipulated time frame. And once that happens, because we can't ask that from the Parliament right now, because SLP will always say there is no such provision for you all to ask this early. Am I correct?
No, the parliamentarians, so they can decide at any given time.
Okay.
Only the president can take that decision after 2.5 years. So that means after February, the president can dissolve the parliament. But parliamentarian itself, the majority decide on that, so they can recall that.
Yeah. So I think that the people should be questioning their public representative as to why they are not pressing the president to call for elections. And let me just add something there, right? When you look at the fact that the laws around this country and the laws around elections, and when you know that politicians can twist and turn their way around these elections, that's when you know that there is something seriously wrong in the way the system is working at the moment. So that's the exact system change that the youth want. If I'm getting back to your question about the youth per se, I think that's what the youth want. The youth want a system where parliament elections or any elections is not decided by a legislator, but it should be decided by the people.
Yeah, because speaking at an event recently, President Ranil Wickremesinghe said that he came into power when the country was going through a very bad time, and he did that for the youth of the country. And this particular video clip is actually uploaded on our Instagram profile, and if you take a look at the comment section, it's all of the youth saying that the system change that they need had to start with this 70-plus-year-old president, making way for other leadership to take over. So
I think it's not just age, because there were countries like Malaysia where they elected presidents like Mahathir Mohamad when he was in his 90s. So it's not just about age, it's about the ability and the mandate to do it. And when you see him empowering the military and the police to do his bidding, you've got to ask yourself again, why does he do that? He's doing that because he knows he doesn't have the mandate of the people. So when you don't have the mandate of the people, you try to build a mandate, a forceful mandate. And that mandate he's trying to build by being somewhat of a dictator.
So, Arun, I want to direct this question to both of you, even Mr. Hityarat, if it suits you. Since we don't have a representative from the government, I decided I'll play devil's advocate today. There are, a couple of months ago, Sri Lanka was in dire straits. There was bare necessities were lacking. We didn't have fuel, we didn't have gas, even milk powder, there were shortages, there were serpentine queues. However, inflation was also soaring, but now inflation has slowed down and the essential items have started flowing into the country. There's a quota-based system for at least fuel, but there is fuel available. Gas is available in small quantities in the least. And now there are certain undertones among society, within society, although people don't expressly say it out loud, that things are going back to normal. Do you all believe that things will go back to normal and you all should support whatever policies and decisions that the president and his government are taking?
Well, good question. But in my opinion, we had a better economy during March, April than this. Because during that time, we were able to import fuel. I mean, the irregulations were a different problem. But the amount of fuel that was imported to the country during March, April, May, that era was much higher than the present times. And we were able to pay the debts I mean, then we'll be able to pay the loans and the interest and everything. And
No, I think by March we had already announced.
yeah, we announced.
We announced
that we won't.
default, yeah.
Yeah, but if you go even little further back, right? So
At the start of the year, let's say.
January, February.
Yeah, let's put it that way.
Okay.
So until we announced bankruptcy, we were managing all these things. I'm not telling, I mean, anyhow, it's subject to question. It was already the election, I mean, the economy was brittle.
Yes.
Because that's the reason, though most of the other countries were affected by COVID, I mean, though we had a very fragile economy only, we completely collapsed. Bangladesh did not have that problem.
Yeah.
India did not have that problem. But actually, frankly speaking, now, maybe visibly we don't see much crisis. There are no much queues at this, but of course QR codes have been restricted. Most of the petrol sheds in the major towns only get a very limited number
Agreed.
of stock.
That is the bare minimum. We shouldn't be having QR codes to begin with.
So that's the most important thing. But the side that we do not see is the health sector. The number of deaths and the difficulties that the health sector people are facing is soaring. Because I myself have a lot of contacts in the health sector. So we discuss with doctors, nurses, and we don't have drugs. We don't have most essential drugs. For example, there's a drug called thanasamic acid, which is used for to control the bleeding and that and this. Because of that particular shortage, in one hospital, I don't want to mention any names because those directors will be victimized.
Yes.
Because I believe there is a gazette preventing medical specialists from commenting on the situation.
But we know what's happening inside. In one particular hospital, such incident took place because there was a shortage of this very important drug, very cheap drug. And they had to again open and they had to do some procedure after surgery. So like that, I mean, we being politicians, we being political activists, those who are working in the grassroots level, we go to funerals, we go to, we meet people every day. The number of funerals that I have been to in the past couple of months are much higher than the number of funerals that I visited earlier.
Pre-crisis.
And all of these deaths could be prevented. Because there are shortage of, very important antibiotics.
But then, Arun, I don't think you can really come to that conclusion now.
No, it's not like that. It's not. What I'm trying to say here is the crisis it's there in a different form.
But then, I mean, simply just, sorry, Shania, just attributing those deaths directly to the crisis, I don't think there is...
Frankly speaking, it's like this. No. Health sector is something that we could easily compare. I mean, apart from the other sectors. But the number of deaths are going up.
So, Rehan, do you concur with Arun, or do you have a difference of opinion? What is your stance on it?
Actually, on this topic, Jamal, if I may, Rehan, the question was actually following up on, I think you pressed on the issue of the IMF bailout in your opening statement. And our bailout is contingent on us fulfilling certain conditionalities, right? Political and economic reforms, anti-corruption mechanisms, and I think fresh elections are obviously one of them.
Yeah.
And creditors obviously want to see a government with legitimacy before lending. So supposing this doesn't come through, as in the deadline keeps getting pushed back and people are just tired of hearing, okay, next month, end of 2 months. What is the contingency plan? Where do we go from there?
Before looking that far into the contingency, I mean, I do agree with you that the IMF money needs to come in, and I also agree with you on, what do we do if it doesn't come in? But then look at the more dangerous picture, right? In January is when the taxes are going to be start to get implemented. That's when they are going to implement all the taxes which they propose in the budget. Now, this affects people in different ways. Someone's car may break down, and the amount that you spend for the repair of that car is going to be 3 to 4 times higher. Someone's house may be affected, I'm just saying, may be affected by a natural disaster, right? Or not insured, like a majority of the houses in Sri Lanka. So where are they going to find the money to repair the house? So people are going to be starting to feel real world problems, like real personal, interpersonal level. It's just going to be having like a domino effect. And then the Aragale is going to start again. But this time it's not going to be a normal Aragale. The Aragale last time was a very vibrant, it was something that the world praised us for. It was held in a non-violent way. A lot of people are saying that Ballface was the benchmark for how protest should really be. The United Nations said it on multiple occasions. But then what will the next Aragale be? The next Aragale is going to be that of hunger, of people actually not having food to eat, people not being able to provide for their families.
Rehan, again, you need to take full responsibility for all the statements
that's
that
fine.
you make.
Yeah. So that's something that you can sort of see, right? It's not something that we should hide commenting on. Just because I say that, it doesn't mean that I want it to happen. But what I'm saying is the possibilities are very much higher than the last Aragale, of Aragale cropping up again. Now, when that happens, then what's going to happen to all these creditors who want to give us money? They'll obviously want us to have elections. The United Nations, correct me if I'm wrong, has on multiple occasions said that Sri Lanka needs to go in for a mandate. The IMF, I can't remember his name, the representative who came just the other day, he said that a political buy-in with the people, with a mandate, is also necessary. That's not his exact words, but what he meant was that Sri Lanka needs election. And why is it that the government is not putting out the IMF conditions? Why do you think even Harsha De Silva, who has the IMF conditions with him, who actually presented it to Parliament, didn't voice it out?
He didn't table it in Parliament.
He didn't table it, but he actually, so he bought it, but he refused to table it because he thought that there could be unrest because of all the conditions that the government has broken already. He didn't just not table it.
They haven't been published either.
Yeah, they didn't publish it. Now, I'm not saying that we should publish it, but what I'm saying is when you're a government that is as unpopular as you are now, publishing it to the people would give them some sort of, not just popularity, would give them some sort of belief or some sort of thinking that, you know, maybe...
But Rehan, now since the ball is in the court of the SJB, since you claim to be in possession of a document supposed to have the conditions of the IMF, why don't you release it?
Because that's not the responsibility of the IMF, the Samagi Jana Balavege. It's a document that was given to the government.
And how did you obtain a copy, if I may?
Got asked from Harsha, but Dr. Harsha, but I don't know how we got a copy. I think it came from committee level, if I'm not mistaken. I think there was an economic committee that was going on, and I think that's when that document was first presented, and he got hold of a copy.
So, but just since people are very, I know the discussion today is on elections, but it branches out to many different angles. And since people are very interested in the conditions that the IMF has imposed, like quite rightly, as you said, the taxes hitting in and all of that, will there come a point when the SJB will decide, look here, the government is not telling the people what the IMF conditions are, we have the conditions, we are going to tell the people about
that? That could also result in inciting violence or intimidation against the government, not peaceful protest, but that could be a mainstream political party.
Section 120 of the Penal Code.
Yeah, so that could be...
You scared of being in prison?
So that could be a major political party that believes in democratic sort of methods to oust the government. That would be us basically endorsing riots against the government, because the people are not going to take it lightly when they know that they've been lied to, when they know that the government is not doing the things that they're supposed to do. For example, I'm sure IMF prerequisite wouldn't have been spending 518 billion rupees for the defense budget. I don't think that's what the IMF wanted. I don't think the IMF in any of their documents would want an army that has not fought any external force in the history of its existence. It has only fought separatists within our own state. We have never fought a foreign army yet. Our army is bigger than England. The army of England, who sends their troops to Afghanistan and Syria, and I mean, you know, that's the level of how much. And why do you think the IMF is delaying it? I mean, we can all say that none of these things matter to the IMF, and the IMF is only looking at policy. No, our creditors would want to know how we're going to pay them back, right? I mean, would you give money to someone as a loan and not ask that person when they're going to pay you back? You'll want not just a return on the money that's being given to you, but you would want to see something substantive happening with the money that you're given. And the fact that it's still been delayed proves that we're not on track. It proves that we have done nothing to convince them. We've appointed ultra mega cabinets. We're still appointing state ministers. We're still going to appoint deputy ministers. They still have the same amount of staff that they always had. They still have all the luxuries that ministers used to have. No one has really tightened their belts, but they also expect the people to tighten their belts. So none of that has, that's what's happening right now, right? So my belief is that unless we go in for elections And unless the people give their mandate to a new government, the IMF is not going to give us this money. But then again, it's up to the government. It's up to the government to then decide whether they are going to continue on this disastrous path or if they're going to make an unselfish decision of getting a majority to call for election.
Mr. Etiarachi, in the context of calling for elections, you said that the local government elections are due before the end of March. Because there has been a lot of speculation around this, and since you have been involved in the electoral process for quite some time, how much does it truly cost to hold a local government election, Mr. Etiarachi?
Well, the last election which we had in 2021, it cost around 7.2 billion.
Billion?
Yeah, no, sorry, 5.7 billion.
5.7 billion. So,
yeah, so in this contest, I think it.
And the numbers have been announced. It's 10 billion.
Yeah, in this contest, it was in 2 years back, right? So now it could be around 10 billion. But you know,
I remember some official report coming out that it's somewhere around 10 billion.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's a calculation.
It's
It's
an
not
estimate.
exact
It's an
amount.
estimate. Yes.
Yeah, estimated.
Understood.
So more than half of these expenses, more than 50% is payment of the staff. So there are overtime and there are other payments. So if we go for an election on weekday, so we can reduce certain amount of money because normally we are having in Saturday. And if we start the elections 1 hour before as scheduled, so we can complete counting because the local elections counting will take place in the same polling stations. So before dark, we can complete our initial counting. So the electricity cost can be reduced because electricity cost also quite big sum in the district level.
Right.
So there are many ways where we can think about how we can reduce the cost. But anyway, the democracy you can't have a democracy in a low price, right? So you have to pay higher price for democracy.
And also, like adding to that, now, at least we are discussing about elections here. But the ruling party is not discussing about elections. That's the most important problem here. If they start discussing about elections, we can come across many lucrative ideas. Because our trade union, we already announced that we will do all the election duties free of charge. Like that, many people can come up
which
with
trade union is this?
with our, what do you call, the JVP trade union.
Oh, the JVP trade union.
We already said, we clearly said, the NTUC, National Trade Union Center. If there will be election, I mean, we need to bring an election. So if there will be election, we are ready to work free of charge.
Right.
So likewise, we can come up with many voluntary ideas. We can involve Aragale, we can involve many other people because people wanted something new. So that's the most important problem here because the government is not interested on discussing this topic.
But the government's argument on their side is that we've got more pressing matters to deal with. Sri Lanka is bankrupt. We need to restructure our debt. We need stable government right now. An election is not going to give us a stable government.
And also, do you think, now, don't you think this part, now, because they are always they're emphasizing about the 6.9 million votes that they got. But do you think when the protests were taking place and when it was getting heated up, if the 6.9 million people were with the government, do you think Gotabaya Rajapaksa would have been chased away from the country? I would say the vast majority of the protesters, those who took part in the protest, were also the voters, those who voted for SLPP.
Some of them.
Some of them. I mean, because personally I meet many of them, those who took part, and we talk to them. And those were not the usual faces that we see every day in protest.
But we can't conclusively say that. And the best way to see if this is really correct or wrong is again hold an election.
Yeah.
It's like a hole in the bucket. We come to the same point.
But whatever said and done, if the government had the mandate of the people, those who voted for the government, and if it is still valid, I'm pretty sure the protests would not have heated up.
The government priority is always their power. So that is why they don't want to go for elections. If they're really serious about election, there can be many other ways where we can reduce the cost. For example, now the ballot paper. So we can use the local papers because in this present contest we can justify. and ink. Now at the moment we don't want to have a ink marking the fingers because the identifications document is it's compulsory now. So properly identify the person. So
Could
there
we
is
go
no
for an
need.
electronic system of voting?
That will be more expensive.
That's
we don't
more-
have the technology.
we don't have a technology, and we
And we
have
don't
to
have
have
the
a
laws.
we don't have a law also. Even in Philippines, the recent elections,
Electoral.
they had 109,000 voting places. They had that amount of voting machines, but they took 1 month to issue a result. Only manually they voted. Only verifications document come out through the machines, and the initial count will take place at the same polling stations. But the official count took almost 1 month. So there is no priority here in Sri Lanka for voting machines.
Now, Shalya, is there anything you'd like to add?
Now, Shalia, can I just pose a question to you?
Certainly.
So I think in your opening statement, you alluded to the fact that it's not just about discussing the matter of underrepresentation, it's about women actually being ready for the role, right? And so I think the issue here is not really to talk about, the underrepresentation, but what we can do about the unpreparedness of women. Just for the sake of adding female representation, you can't push inexperienced women, you can't push uneducated women. You're just adding fuel to the fire. So what are your thoughts on, solving that issue, giving women the platform to grow into the politicians that they could be one day?
Right. Thank you so much for the question. Actually, that was fantastic. I should, I think, at this point, sort of introduce this certain guide that we launched from the Helia Foundation. So this guide basically highlights the sort of challenges as well as the ways in which that we could overcome these challenges to female participation in politics. And we call this crossing Diyavannawa or Diyavanna Tharanya, meaning the sort of challenges that women specifically encounter when sort of coming to the parliament. So now even in this guide, we have highlighted how out of the 1,089 candidates that were put forth for the 2020 general election, only 59 were women. Only 59 were women, and this 1,089 were the collective candidates put forth by the 5 major political parties in this country, right? So I think the sub-question should be, should we really wait until there's until the legislature tells us, okay, there's a mandatory quota, therefore nominate women. There's a mandatory quota, show us some, women here, just because there's a mandatory quota. Should you give me this seat just because I'm a woman?
Just because it's allocated.
Just because it's allocated, and just because I'm bound by the law to give you a seat. What are the sort of initiatives that the political parties in this country have taken?
Why do you think that mindset exists?
Because they don't think it's needed. That is precisely why we don't have a cabinet ministry for women. Right?
Yeah.
And women, we have 52% of the population consists of women, and we don't have a cabinet ministry because we think the sort of issues that are connected to women are only just like women's issues.
Well, we do have one now, don't we?
We have a state ministry. That's a big difference.
Okay.
That's a very big difference. And especially as a country who has international obligations to, we have signed certain treaties, some certain conventions. And if you take for an example, the CEDAW Convention, a convention to sort of eliminate all forms of discrimination. That itself is not still a law in our country. We haven't still ratified that as a piece of legislation in our country.
There's no enabling legislation.
There's no enabling legislation. And I think it's also because if you take the 225 members of the parliament, only 12 are women. And out of these 12, only 6 are new entrants, fresh entrants to the parliament. All the others have been just re-elected. And out of which only 3 came through the elections, and all the others were they come through the national list.
Yeah.
That is the actual situation of our parliament. So the real question, like you asked me, is why are they not there?
Yeah.
What exactly is the reason? So let me ask this question. Have any one of you voted for a woman?
It's a very good question.
Have any one of you voted for a woman? Okay, I see one. I see one. See, that's precise. I think that's where we need to ask ourselves.
But then again, now, Shalya, you were just saying, I think Shania also pointed this out, should we just vote for a woman because she's a woman? Now, how do you justify that? Should I vote for a woman just because she's a woman?
That's precisely what I was coming to.
They should carry good representation,
Getting
right?
into a very controversial.
No, that's precisely what I was getting at, right? This is that one question that people ask themselves when they go to vote for a woman, and they ask themselves, okay, why should I vote for her? Because say people tend to scrutinize a lot when it's a woman. Even this card of nepotism, people tend to use it only for a woman. For an example, oh, she's somebody is only used when she's a female candidate. Whereas if you take the 225 parliamentarians, specifically the male parliamentarians, no offense, they all come to parliament because of, most of them at least come because of some certain family link.
Now, Shale, how do you suppose female representation would improve if campaign finance laws are introduced?
Because then women would know, for an example, hypothetically speaking, if you say for general election only 2 million can be spent, then I could certainly save that amount of money. Because we know that, I mean, women don't really resort to corrupt ways of sort of earning money because we think of like consequences, right? We think of consequences that I might have to encounter.
Now, I don't think you can generalize.
You cannot.
No, I would generalize because there are reports to that fact that women are less corrupted than men. I could certainly. I'm serious.
Now we're walking on eggshells.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I mean, precisely why we haven't seen a lot of female parliamentarians up in High Court on corruption charges.
Have we? I think.
I don't know about the corruption aspect, but is there a stigma against young people and women in parliament?
Please
because
bring this question to us.
You also said that we had a female head of state.
Yes.
But where did things change? What went wrong? Why do we barely have any representation?
I think it was the legitimacy. I think it's where she went wrong and it was just downhill.
Precisely what I was coming for.
Yeah.
So, see, merely having a quota system, I think it's a brilliant entryway to get women to come on board and learn what's going on and to sort of, deploy and see what needs to be done. Because, see, politics is sort of a new subject for women, right? Because we're always stigmatized. Today that cup of tea is made by a woman. 99.9% of germs should be eradicated by women. So we are stereotyped to, household shows. And no matter, even if I'm the head of state, I have to still go and take care of all the obligations that have been passed to me by the culture.
Do you feel like there's a stigma against?
Certainly, there is a stigma because, see, from homemaker to policymaker, people haven't really made that shift in their mind.
And that's a Asian mentality, would you say? Because I mean, Finland has a prime minister, Sanna Marin, who was 34 or 35 when she became prime minister.
Yeah, New Zealand just doing a great job.
But I mean, Sanna was only 34 or 35.
34 when she came. And let me also add this. So not just the quota system. Like I said earlier, we shouldn't wait till the legislature sort of impose certain obligations on us to be like, okay, I'll wait till the law tells me to do something. But we need to ask ourselves, what have I as a political party in this country done to sort of promote the participation of women in the local government, in provincials and in the parliament? Right, that is very important. Now, especially some of the people that we have spoken to through this book during some of the stakeholder discussions we had, they said that even these interviews that are being held to sort of give the candidacy, they are not transparent.
Do you also believe the electoral system of proportional representation has stifled equal representation in parliament? And if we bring a mix of first past the post and proportional representation, this ratio would be much higher.
Yeah, just Jaimal, on that point, there's a question that has been directed directly to Mr. Hettiarach, I think, of course, because he's an expert in this subject and has many, many years of experience on the matter. I'll read the question as it is. My question is to Mr. Hettiarach. If we go for elections, and this question, of course, was sent in by one of our viewers. Thank you very much for the question. If we go in for elections under the same PR, proportional representation system, what can helpless citizens do to stop heavy money spending corrupt politicians from coming back to the next parliament? Can't we have a cap on the number of times a politician can enter parliament? Of course, we can use this as two questions, cover a broader spectrum.
I don't know which election he's referred because the scheduled elections is local elections.
I think he's referring to...
He's referring parliamentary elections. So parliamentary elections, we do have enough time to get through these campaign finance limitations. But even that campaign finance document or draft legislations, there are a lot of loopholes. In fact, I wrote to the President, Prime Minister and the Justice Minister in the morning today, asking him to add some of these issues or address those issues. For example, there is no separate bank account introduced in this act. So if you are not having a separate account as a candidate, there are many other, your support can contribute many different ways in your campaign. There is no way to control that. And there is no proper mechanism to monitor that. And there is no prevention mechanism for supporters to contribute in a given percentage. For example, now if I'm a candidate, so one of you can say, so don't worry about your campaign, I will look after the whole campaign. You can be either individual or a business person. So end of the elections, if I become a parliamentarian or a minister, then I have to work whatever they obligate. So there should be some sort of ceiling on the percentage where you can contribute.
Mr. Hettiarachchi, how much is your contribution in this campaign financing draft that people speak of?
Well, there is no specific amount has given so far. But we know there are some other countries, for example, in...
I'm speaking about a piece of legislation. Is something like that coming out?
No, there is no specific amount has given. They are saying the Elections Commission should announce each and every elections cap. What are the limitations?
So there's
for local
not going to be a separate act in Parliament brought to regulate this matter. This is the Elections Commission. Already the inherent powers of the Elections
Commission. Yeah. Considering the voter population. For example, in Bangladesh, they calculate based on the voter populations. I think I can remember it's 5 taka for each voter. So if there is 100,000, so that means 500,000 taka you can use for campaigning, something like that. So it has to define by the Elections Commission.
But then also it has to be transparent.
Mr. Hettiarachchi, but how can the Elections Commission, with the little powers that they have, as far as enforcement goes, now we know that the Elections Commissioner in India becomes as powerful as the Prime Minister during times of elections. They can issue orders to police officers on enforcement. We don't have an Elections Commission like that. I mean, there are allegations even, challenging the independence of the Elections Commission because of the manner in which it is appointed.
Yeah, perfect.
Can I just... I just want to mention one thing to you. I'm just going to use this example, right? Now, I filed, along with 2 members in our youth group, we filed a RTI at the Elections Commission requesting for the asset declaration of a member of parliament who was involved in the Pandora scandal, right? They refused to give it to us. So I just want to bring that into the equation because some laws are there. But what's the point of having these laws? Now, if you're supposed to submit your assets to the Election Commission, it should also be the right of a citizen to question how much assets that particular MP has had, as opposed to how much assets she actually declared to the Commission.
But what was the reason that was given to you, Rehan? As to why it can't
they basically took a stipulated time. They kept on writing back to us.
But
and
through
they
a court case, you can get...
You can get it through an appeal,
so
but that again is a process.
So you have filed an appeal, no?
No, so the first time we didn't because it was during COVID and there were lots of issues with courts. But we refiled an RTI about 2 weeks ago. Myself, then the SJB Youth National Organizer, Chamit Vijayasundar, and I think it was Chamatka Ratnayaka, attorney at law. So we actually filed another RTI. So we are hoping to take it to appeal. So I just bought that comparison to say that there are some laws in existence, but then again, what's the point of having a law if there's not going to be anything good that comes out of it to a citizen or to the public? Just want to bring that point.
But I can address that question also partly. There is, once you request certain information through RTI, if they refuse, there is a designated officer, the second stage, so you can appeal to him. If he or she also refuse, you can go for a commission. So there is 3 steps. So otherwise, you can go to the court. But if I answer your questions, even the gentleman who raised these questions, but this legislation has a given authority. Yes, true that the Elections Commission doesn't have power compared with the Indian Commission, because Indian Commission...
Elections Commission can't enforce. Say the Elections Commission puts a cap saying, okay, 2 million, you can't spend more than 2 million. I spend more than 2 million. What can the Elections Commission...
Yeah, but there is a provisions that each and every candidate, but there are also loopholes, but with that, each and every candidate should submit their expenses report after the elections. The Election Commission, legally, they are duty bound to publish that. Sinhala, English and Tamil papers. At least 3 papers they have to publicize. Then the voters or a candidate or the other party, politician or a civil society, whoever are interested on these, so they can monitor each and every candidate and they can compare the submit document. So you can file the case. But the problem here again, the fine has, there is no clear provision for fines, whatever, but they have a direct existing legal framework with the other Elections Act. So I went through the other acts. It says only 300 rupees fine.
Wow.
And 3 years you
Not
can't
even $1.
Yeah, 3 years you can't register as voter, or you can't contest and the election. So that is where at the moment. So we need to bring some legal framework on that, and there is no monitoring mechanism by the elections manager.
So when you say legal framework, you mean an act of parliament?
Yeah, I mean the same act, we need to add that provisions. What are the fines? And also there should be a monitoring mechanism by the Elections Commission. Of course, we can do it, media can do it, but there should be an official system, mechanism to monitor the candidate expenses. And also I wanted to highlight that in the last local elections, because we are talking about the local elections, we have filed a case. One of the candidates in last local elections in Monragala district,
Lost a seat.
he spent around 40 million Sri Lankan rupees. 40 million.
400 lakhs.
400 lakhs.
But
for local council is around 600 families within that area. So can you imagine? We filed a case with support of the relevant candidate, but now it has already almost 5 years. So far, we were success in the court, but the judgment also delivered, but according to the system, it has to gazette by the president.
No, I
But
mean,
so far we don't have result. For 5 years.
What do you mean it has to be gazetted by the president?
No, the decisions, the decision has to go to the president, and president has to gazette it. Then only the Election Commission act accordingly.
let me also ask a small question here. Like I was about to ask about this president's part here. Now, don't you think about any direct relationship between the executive presidency and the election irregularities?
And
Election irregularities, because if you see the context before 1978, you are more experienced than myself, and I'm just expressing my point of view. I would say the elections were more free and fair. But since we introduced the executive presidency to the scene only, I think things got worse. India does not have an executive president. So they have this parliamentary whatever system there. So even Prime Minister is bound to certain restrictions. But here, as you said, the gazette also has to be approved by the president. So there are deadlocks here. So I think in order to have free and fair election in this country, in the future, we should get rid of this executive presidency also. Because without that, we cannot, I mean, even after 10 years, 20 years, we will be still discussing about this topic. I see some relationship here.
Is that a substantial claim, Mr. Hettiarachchi? Your views on it?
When the power is vested with one individual, it always, not only the elections, even in other sectors, that, and we have been experienced this now over the decades now. So I think I'm also in favor.
I mean, without changing that, no matter how many reforms that we bring.
But the thing is, when you change the executive presidency, we have to revisit the electoral system also.
Right. Exactly.
You can't do it in separate.
Exactly.
You have
the system
it has to be done in tandem.
together. Yeah.
Exactly.
But just my perspective on this, my 2 cents, if you will. Mr. Hettiarachchi, given that we're in the midst of a crisis, and now we're discussing an election that's coming up, a possible general election that could be called if the president dissolves parliament, where would you rank the abolishment of the executive presidency on this list of priorities?
I don't think it may not reality in the coming years.
Coming years, you mean, just give us a random time.
You know, the constitution reforms, we are talking about 2001. How many presidents we have passed last 2 decades? Even the recent past president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, also appointed the committee. And during Yahapalana period, they have appointed the committee and they went around the country and brought up very good proposals.
There's a draft, I believe. There's a draft. There's a certain draft.
Yeah, there are so many drafts actually. Even 2001 we had a draft. So there are so many nice documents, but they don't want to change this.
They're collecting dust.
Yeah. And for example, the electoral reform also, we can remember in 2001 with the present Prime Minister headed that committee. We had a reform committee in 2004. Again, 2021, we had a reform committee headed by the same Prime Minister. Now, recently, the Justice Minister again called for electoral reform committee. This is just because to use it as a strategy or tool for delay the elections. So this is how the politicians are using this reform in Sri Lanka.
And one good
question to you.
I think Arun wants to just...
And one good example was like, Faisal Mustafa.
Voted against his own delimitation committee
he brought
report.
the reform and he voted against that. So, I mean, we can understand the ulterior motive of this.
Behind it.
Mariam, your question?
Yeah, you were talking about local government elections. Now, if local government elections are not going to result in the same results that the people are expecting for change in the system and all that, can't we go for general elections straight away instead? Because now local government elections are supposed to happen because of the delay and all that. What if we have both elections together? Can that work? Or?
If the government decides, yes. If the parliament decides, yes. But there is no legal framework, or we can't demand. I mean,
and it
as a
doesn't look
citizen,
like
we
they're
can
going to
demand,
decide.
but there is no legally.
Not bound to.
Yeah, they are not duty bound.
Okay.
But the local council, we know that it may not make big difference, even if we have a local elections. I mean, the result can be differ from the previous elections, but the economic situation may be not.
But is it going to give the people what they're asking for, the local government elections?
Well, as she mentioned, in a democratic system, we are using representative democracy. So, according to the existing law, every 4 years we have to have a local elections. Now, at the moment, the local government minister has postponed for 1 year. He has right to do that, but that term will end by March. So they are duty bound to have elections. So the people we have to give them a chance, opportunity to select their representative.
Yeah.
Whether the government like or not, that is their duty. That is the system which we are exercising. If we wanted to change that, of course we can change it. Even the provincial council, if you are not happy with the provincial council system, the parliament can discuss, because I mean they can't just change it because it has a long history why we introduce a provincial system.
Of course.
But if they want to change, but they can have a consultations and they can change constitutionally. But otherwise, they are duty bound to follow the existing law. That's the constitution ask them to do. So that is our positions on this local elections, whether it is make some different result or not. That is the democracy which we are exercising now.
Rehan, just a quick question before Jaimal has one for you as well. So many of the international organizations, many of them sort of propose the idea of having an opposition that stands in solidarity. But the issue here in Sri Lanka is a fractious opposition. We have a fractious opposition that has differing goals even within the party, differing goals, and they're working towards different objectives. So what do you think the cure for that is?
I'm just going to talk about a SJB perspective because I can't speak about all the other oppositions that have been around. But the SJB is Sri Lanka's youngest political party, Sri Lanka's youngest opposition party. Unfortunately, we only have 52 MPs, right? And that is not something we decided, that's what the people decided. When they voted for the SLPP-led Rajapaksa government, they effectively gave us only 52 MPs. Now, what can we do with that 52 MPs as opposed to the number that the president has with the SLPP? Now, when you look at it in that perspective, you have to think, what does that say about the current political sort of balance that we have right now, right? We have a government whose president had to resign prematurely, who got 6.9 million votes, and now it elected a president to safeguard their interests. Now, one of their major interests is elections, because they know that if they run again, they know if they go in for general election again, half of that number or even more is going to lose their seat. So the most practical thing was to support a president who will support postponing elections, right? So that was their main objective. So how can we morally, ethically, rightfully stand by and show solidarity to a government that is formed on false principles or, fake premise, if I would call it that? How do you support something like that? Because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we belong to a political party, and our legislators are going to run for parliament or local government elections. Now, how does that happen? It happens with the votes of the people, right? But will the people vote for legislators who go and stand with people accused of mass-scale corruption? Not just corruption, so many different allegations against the current government as well, because the same set of ministers are the ones that were there before. So I don't think the solidarity thing works in this instance. I think, yes, there are times where the government should work the opposition should work in solidarity with the government. I think we've proved that to a certain level by proposing names of, for example, Dr. Harsha for the Committee of Public Finance, or for the COPA. We've actually given our expertise, and we've said we'd vote for legislations that are right. But then again, if I do use an example about legislation that we didn't go for, that we get criticized about, is the budget. But then again, how do we show solidarity and support a budget that has really done nothing for the people, and that has just been more or less a pro-max version of a Rajapaksa budget? How do we support that?
And also, I think general public sentiment is that they fail to see a better alternative standing in front of them. So on the perspective of your party, what is the mechanism that you would use to win the trust of the public, to change that general sentiment?
That's funny you asked that, because think about the fact of the presidential election, right? Think about the fact that Sajith Premadasa challenged or invited Gotabaya Rajapaksa for a debate. Did he come in for a debate? He didn't. But what was the public's reaction to it? The public's reaction was that, he's not a talker, why does he have to come on a debate? But if he did come on a debate at that time, the public would have witnessed how disastrous his policies would have been. How disastrous his agricultural policy would have been. How disastrous his policy on general economics would have been. But our people embrace that. So that's what I always say, that system change doesn't just start with us as politicians. It should start with the people. You need to be responsible. You need to be a responsible voter. You need to be a voter that doesn't vote for the butt packet or the bottle of alcohol that's given to them or the welfare that's given to them. They have to make conscious, educated voting decisions. So that's why I think that for this to work out, it has to be a consensus. It has to be a mutual consensus between...
Do you think a voter can make a conscious, educated decision when they are starving?
That depends on the subsections of society that are actually going through the hardest of times during this economic crisis. Yes, there are people that are starving, but there's also a subsection of community that is not starving.
So Rehan, I want to
Can I add your question? Because I have experience which Arun was mentioning Philippines. So after 30 years, BBM Marcos come back. What was the corruptions which they were talking about?
Yeah.
But that is because of the poverty. I have witnessed how the politicians, the political parties
use poverty.
Yeah. Distribute the money each and every voters during election period. So in generally, in Sri Lankan contest, Sri Lankan, if you look at in rupee and cents, so they are getting around 25,000 rupees. So each and every voters from many different parties. As we mentioned, there are 5 level of elections took place at the same day. So each and every candidate, whether it is a ruling or oppositions, they bribe the voters. Gift. So this poverty, with the poverty, you can't expect people to come and vote in a healthy manner.
So I think, in my personal opinion, I believe while the lower segments of society, poverty plays a role in certain rulers being appointed, political apathy also exists in Sri Lanka when it comes to certain segments of society, maybe the middle class and the upper class as well. So Rehan, I want to particularly ask this from you because you're the Vice Chairman of the SJB Youth, and there has been a massive call for the youth to come forward, take the reins of the country, run the country properly and whatnot, introduce progressive policies, reforms and thereon. So in terms of political apathy, ignorance, at the end of the day, like you said, the people are the ones who go to the voting booth and they vote for their representative. Yeah. But if they don't know who their representative is, what he represents, what sort of policies, reforms, what sort of decisions he will implement and bring forward, we can't have a country that develops economically, socially, politically, in any sort of aspect. So how does the SJB Youth particularly aim at improving this particular aspect of society in terms of reaching out to young people, telling them you need to be aware of who your representatives are, you need to be aware of what the political landscape in Sri Lanka essentially, and make pragmatic decisions when you go to the voting booth to vote your next leader?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So basically I also function as the main organizer for Veligama.
Right.
Chief organizer, the electoral organizer for Veligama. And all organizers, we are given a common sort of platform or we are given a common guideline that we need to speak to people about. The economic aspect of that, now I'm not an economist, but we are briefed by people like Dr. Harsha, Iran, on what to say when people ask us certain questions about the economy. Now that doesn't mean that that I'm a good economist, it just means that that's the message given to us by the people handling the economy.
Professionals, yes.
So we have different lines that we speak on. We've started reorganizing our grassroots. For example, we have 67 GS wards and 87 counting stations.
Right.
That's for the entire Veligama electorate. It's Mathura's, one of Mathura's biggest electorates.
Right.
Has a 100,000 plus voter bank. So we already started going from ward to ward. And the electoral organizer also becomes someone that has a deciding sort of say when it comes to nominations. When it comes to nominations, the electoral organizer's approval is also needed. I'm not saying that there are instances where the leadership also makes, the party leadership also makes nominations, but the majority of times it's rested with the electoral organizer. Now I made a decision this time that it's also a party decision where we are going to give more nominations to women. We're going to give more nominations to the youth. I'm not saying that we're not going to give it to people who are older or people who are sort of like senior citizens, but we're also going to make a sort of real effort to give it to the women and to the youth in general. Because I think that's the way moving forward, because Sri Lanka is having a huge issue with brain drain, right? We have lots of people leaving the country.
Yes.
A lot of youth don't want to get into politics because they don't believe in politics in Sri Lanka.
True.
But that's because they don't get opportunities to contest elections. But then, as a party, when we decide that we are going to give more nominations to the youth than for women, that's going to make possible legislators more involved with the decision-making processes in the country. I'll use a...
But now, Rehan, when you say giving more room for youth and women representation, you mean people who have not been in parliament, newcomers,
Do
right?
we have potential
Yeah, because the local government...
I want to just understand how you propose on doing that.
No, so I'm talking about local government elections.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there are ideas floating around of coalitions and alliances being formed now. I mean, the UNP and the SLPP. It's quite public now almost.
Yeah.
The SJB too, at your recently held conference, I believe. Convention, yes. At your recently held convention, you had representatives like Dilan Pereira and from other breakaway factions of the SLPP. So, by the looks of it, to a reasonable person, which I believe I am, it seems as if you're going to enter into a coalition with them as well. So, given that such an eventuality does take place, how are you going to accommodate new people?
Okay, so when you look at the faction that Dalasal Hapirma and that crowd bring in, you also got to understand we're the main constituent party. So there can be alliances, there can be coalitions, but there'll be certain things that they also have to agree with us because we have a bigger number than them. If you look at that number, you'll get it, probably you'll get about 10 MPs at the moment, or under just 10 MPs. But as a main constituent party, it's also going to be our ideas and our ideologies that we want to present forward, right? Now, why I say, now you interestingly asked me about the experience needed, right? Local government elections is where I started my political career in 2016 when I became the mayor in Waligama. I started from the lowest level. Now, what does that do? That sort of preps you up for future elections. That preps you up for a provincial council election. Then it later preps you up how to get into parliament. But why it's important to follow these steps is that by the time you go to the highest legislative body, which is parliament, you actually go in with a person who's had a sound grassroots knowledge in local politics or local government.
Right.
Right? When you go with that kind of knowledge, you are better equipped to just like an organization. Just like how you would get a traditional CEO who is not just appointed a CEO, but who has had managerial level experience within an organization. So I would like to compare that to a political party as well. Because if we put in youngsters and if we put in more women, like Naushad said, it gives a better representation to the 52% of women around the country. And when you take the youth into consideration, you get that 1.2 to 1.8 million block vote that's coming in at a future election, which is going to be the deciding factor in an election. And I just want to use one example for that. If you look at the US midterm elections, everyone was talking about a red wave. Everyone was saying that President Donald Trump's policies would result in all his candidates winning and they would have a huge majority in the Senate. But what happened there? The reason they couldn't do it is because after decades in American politics, you had a youth vote that usually doesn't vote, who went out in numbers to defeat the candidates of President Trump.
Right.
So the youth played a big role in that, and that's not going to be just the US. It's going to be a deciding vote in a future Sri Lankan election as well.
Rehan, just one question, if I can pose to Naushad.
I think in fairness to the NPP,
Yes.
I think we should ask Arun the same question because
Exactly. Yes.
Arun, I think you can relate to the question that I asked from Rehan and give your answer as well.
If you could repeat the
yes,
question.
what the NPP's plan is in
Precisely.
terms of advocating for youth representation, female representation, and all of that. What sort of plans and policies you have in place to address political apathy in the country?
Exactly. It's like this. We do not believe in quotas alone. The mistake that I see in some channels and some debates also, like they bring a female and ask the female about the female representation and quotas and everything, and that's done.
That's
So,
right.
yeah,
Precisely. Now, if you
precisely.
take me, I'm
So-
here to only speak about female representation.
I think this, I mean, we should
Now,
get out of
Naushad,
the...
you were the one who put that
No, no,
restriction on us. We
generally.
can pose political questions if you want.
I think we should get out of the box. We should talk about women. Women should talk about non-women topics.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you so
just
much.
because a person who is just being a woman does not mean that she is in favor of women.
Absolutely. It doesn't qualify her to represent all.
Because I
concerns.
can, I can come up with two examples. One is Diana Gamage, and the other one is, one politician in my town. She's a bar owner. She's a bus owner. I mean, I'm not pinpointing on her job or whatever.
Which district are you from?
Trincomalee,
Okay.
right? I can tell the name, Ariyati Galapati, right? And she's into so many illegal activities, but she was the chairman of the provincial council.
But I mean, owning a bar and owning buses.
No, it's not that. It's not that. But those are not illegal things. But when it comes to the
To
violence,
some
and
people,
everything-
unethical maybe.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say here is now, I mean, if you take their political career, the amount of things that they have done to the empowerment of the women is much lower than some of the men politicians also. So what I'm trying to say here is, we have to get out of the box. So in NPP, we do not have any quotas. So I'm one of the, I think I'm supposed to be the youngest member in the National Executive Committee, but we did not have any quotas. Everything was based on practical things. And we got only one nationalist seat, and that was given to non-JVP member, Dr. Harni Amarasuriya. She was representing the Progressive Women Collective.
So roles were given based on meritocracy.
Based on the contribution, based on the participation, and based on the priority.
Right.
So I think quota systems could help us to, reach up to a certain level.
Good entry point.
But that will not give the final solution. Now, for example, if you take the education system in Sri Lanka, we started with quota system, but quota system has not provided the ultimate, whatever the result of that. So we have to start, we can start with quota system and we can, but ultimately until we reach the equality, nothing will work. So in NPP we believe in that. Many youth activists are there, many are working, many women are there. And I mean, it is not something, you know, forcefully we come up, but there is natural participation. And for example, if you take a country like Cuba, if you take their legislative sector, I think there are more women than men. Statistically, I have to check again, but I heard.
Even conservative countries like Iran and Pakistan have better ratios of
so here,
than here.
When it comes to
I just want to ask you one question. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Just want to find out in your organization or in your political party, which is essentially the JVP, do you all have any? I'm just asking this as a question, right? Do you all, how many women do you all have? For example, in your main office bearers, for example, your party chairman, your general secretary, or
National Executive Committee.
Not the National Executive Committee. I'm talking about, you know, for example, in the SJB, you get the leader, you get the leader, you get the deputy leader, you get a chairman. Yeah.
Party administration.
So it's not the executive committee. So that's like the working committee. I'm saying in a like party hierarchy.
Party administration.
In the administration, how many women do you all have? I just want to use this as a sort of thing.
Actually, like I cannot come up with numbers, right?
But I think Arun said that it's not based on gender.
It's based on gender.
Based on
now,
merit.
for example, now we got one nationalist seat, and we gave to Dr. Harini.
No, I mean, not because she was a woman,
because she was best qualified for that role.
Yeah, but being a woman, maybe she has contributed more to the towards women more than other people. So, but that was an added qualification.
Right.
But that was not
the pure basis.
It was
the base qualification.
So, I mean, when it comes to I personally, I do not believe in these quotas and, you know, whatever, things like that. But the participation of youth, women and all the other entities in the society
that are left out of this governance structure.
Yeah.
That have been left out of governance structure for so long. Rehan, what was the comparison you were trying to make? I'm just very curious.
I was trying to make was that yes, there should be meritocracy, but it should be a equal sort of distribution of meritocracy.
Equitable meritocracy.
Yeah. So it should be meritocracy across the board. And for example, the reason I say that is because in the NPP, for example, I can name Rai, Balthazar, a very prominent sort of youth sort of activist within their party, or I could even mention Arun. And again, what the question was that have they been given a voice within the party?
No, exactly.
He's representing the party.
It's like this.
No. So I'm not talking about Arun. I'm not talking about Arun. I'm saying as a woman, other than Dr. Harini Amadusuri and Rai,
we have. I will
being given equal opportunity. And the reason I asked that is because
the thing is now we have a different party setup compared to SJB. Our setup is something different.
Obviously.
So now we don't appoint people just to satisfy, and our stages are different.
This is going into different territory now.
But we have got Saman Maligunasinghe, right? She is from Women for Rights. And we have got Dr. Harini Amarasuriya. We have got Saroja Savitri Polraj. And we have got Rai Balthasar. And we have got many more. There are many more people in the executive committee, and all of us get together and take decisions. So, I mean, once again, what I'm trying to say is, just by separating, this will not work. Let me also let me also add something. Now, can you tell me if Chandrika Bandanayake Kumaratunga or Sirima Bandanayake were not part of political families, would have they been elected as Prime Minister or President?
I think this goes back to Naushal's argument that it's only when a woman comes into power that they start bringing up political relations.
If they were not from that background,
with all due respect, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga also had a brother who would have also come into politics.
What I'm trying to tell you is,
if the same argument is propounded, would someone like Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is a political giant in Sri Lanka, come into power if D.A. Rajapaksa wasn't in politics?
I just want to tell you something there, right? I think being a relation of a politician, because I come from a political background, I've had two grandfathers who were cabinet ministers in the UMP government.
I have got a perfect example here.
And,
was just about to say.
and what I say is, it shouldn't be a qualification and neither should it be a disqualification.
Okay.
It should be all, again, based on merit. It's about what you do and how you start. You know, for example, I started at the Urban Council. I didn't start where my grandparents, for example, ended their political career. You know, you shouldn't think that just because you're a relation of a politician or an MP that you're entitled to go into
So
parliament.
what you're saying
not.
is you should basically not inherit politics.
You shouldn't,
The-
but it should neither be it shouldn't be a disqualification either.
But I
because
think the only
what
question
you
here
do, you
is
can't go
imbalance
back
of
and-
power and imbalance of resources, because the sort of resources and the power another newcomer would have without any strings attached to a political family would be very much limited to,
Compared
no
to
offense,
someone who
compared to who comes with that sort of
aligned
connection.
with the
I think
political-
that is the
And I
the
think
debate
that's
here.
a
now, shall I
practical
also think
reality.
it's the
That's a practical
mindset?
reality, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
not only the case in Sri Lanka. That's the case in other countries in the
Across
world.
the board.
And not just in politics, in any profession,
Yes.
if you take that into
Exactly.
account.
And
Like
also
if I
the
come from a
party
medical,
that they represent also play a major role here, because I remember in 2000 we had only 2 nationalist seats and we gave one to Anjanumma from Tihari. Simple.
I think.
So she was
one
not
last
from
question.
any political backgrounds or anything. And in 2000 she was given a nationalist seat. 2001 I think she contested and won. 2004 also she won. So we paved that platform. And I think she is the one and only Muslim parliamentarian woman who had no political links.
So, like I say, I don't think it should be frowned upon. It should only be frowned upon if you're going to abuse the entrance you have with that kind of power. Now, because what do you do, right? If you have a relation in politics and if you wanna do good for the country and if you wanna be a politician, I mean, what do? Do you go back in a time machine and change the fact that you were born and that you should have been
You
born
can't.
to a doctor? You can't. You can't do it practically. It's not possible. But how you do it is you got to work your way around it. You got to realize that. Yes, I do come from a political background, but that political background shouldn't be a qualification for me.
Exactly.
But Rehan, let me ask you this question. Now, coming from a political family, you might obviously know other members of parliament, people in government, people in governance,
Yeah.
people in politics who
Yeah.
have, come from political backgrounds.
Yeah.
In your opinion, do a bulk of them deserve it? Don't they?
That's a really hard question for me to ask because I'll have to answer because I'll have to go into numbers.
So we'll move on to some other questions. You
Yeah.
sit on that, and then we'll come
Can't
back
really
to you.
work out numbers right now.
But you're not an economist.
It'll be a good it'll be a extensive Google search, no? And I don't want people to think I'm rude looking at my phone.
I think she had a question.
Yeah, now, Shala, what would you call a good example of a government that the people can be confident in? Like, how much female representation are you expecting from, like, a perfect government? Not perfect, really, but a government that can satisfy the people?
See, I'm not going to sort of compare ourselves to a different country because
Okay.
we have different dynamics and we have different other factors we need to take into account.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to compare ourselves to another South Asian country and say, oh, look, we need to be this country. But I think every time we speak of female representation, we should also look into account the underlying issues. And we need to sort of resolve these underlying issues. For an example, if you take the 25% mandatory quota, I'm sure Mr. Hettiarachi will be able to assist me in this. If you look at it, section 65 AA of this particular section that says the party who wins the majority of the ward seats, they're relieved of this responsibility to nominate about 25% of women to the local council. So then, when you do a little bit of a research into the existing local authorities in this country, you will see that the governing party does not have any female representation because of this existing section. So the very sort of the statute that sort of enables mandatory participation of women in politics also undermines the winning party and sort of relieves the winning party to sort of have women on board.
That is
which-
absolutely on point.
So, which once again creates a power imbalance. So, see, for an example, you and I might sit in this council, but if you are not from the governing party, that takes away all our sort of, power to sort of make decisions, to sort of contribute to the decisions. So, once again, even if you look at the parliament, that is the exact problem that we have because of the underrepresentation, because of women are not sort of promoted, because we don't have legislations in place. Also, the role of media need to be highlighted. We don't have laws on gendered online hate speech. We have so much of taboos. Which parent is going to say, I want my daughter to be a politician? Which parent would ever say, no, I don't want my daughter to be a doctor, I want my daughter to be a policymaker one day? Which parent would say that? And especially Arun and both of them were speaking about youth, and then how youth should take part in, become an informed voter. I think we need to also talk about the role of the education system in this country. More than 90% of equal number of girls and boys get enrolled in education system in this country. So what is the role of education to sort of inform people to sort of analyze, for an example, a manifesto?
From a younger age.
From a young age. How do you analyze a manifesto? Have we ever analyzed a manifesto? Because if we did, for an example, as a woman, if I analyze the manifestos in 2020 general election, I would understand which parties want to promote female participation, which parties didn't want to promote female participation, for an example. But since we are not informed, we always think that how youth effectively take part in politics, how women effectively take part in politics is by actually running. No, it's also by voting. It's also by speaking up and voting, especially with knowledge as to whom you are voting, why you are voting, and for what you are voting. I think Rehan also brought up this issue of agriculture, how there was like a ban on fertilizer, for an example. See, now people didn't vote for that, like he very correctly mentioned. But that is because people tend to deviate from the manifesto they have put out, because there's no underlying mechanism to hold the politician accountable to the manifesto that he put out in the first place. Do we know when a president is elected who the cabinet is going to be?
And did the Rajapakshas get appointed automatically? No.
I mean, I'm not speaking of politics, but then I'm just speaking in general. I'm just speaking in general. Do we know? Do we know, for an example?
I'm trying to say things that she can't say.
No.
I'm helping the sister out.
No.
Rehan, I told you at the start, Rehan, you need to take responsibility for the statements that you're making.
That's right.
I think, Mr. Hettiarachchi?
Just to add 2 points which was highlighted by her, we need to make a system to for these manifestos bring into the legal framework.
Yeah,
I think this was
Because
discussed
it
in...
needs to be a binding document.
Yes.
Exactly. So there is, I mean, we know that if you look at even the opposition party or a ruling party manifesto itself is a nice document.
Yes.
So
But even that is
everything
not
good
legally
things
binding.
are
Looks good, sounds good.
Yeah. The people in theoretically, I mean, practically it's a different situations, but theoretically we are vote for the manifesto, right?
And not for the people. Mr. Hettiarachchi, I need to interrupt you there because we're in the final 10 minutes of this show, and I'd open the floor for the closing statements from each of our panelists. Usually we'd give more time, but since we are so strapped for time, each panelist will get 2 minutes. I will inform you at the end of the 2 minutes. So, Arun, if you don't mind, we started off with you. Let's give it a go again.
We are going through a very hard time. Historically, we are facing the worst economic crisis ever. And people got onto the street and they wanted to get rid of this corruption and the political culture. They wanted something new, but apparently that did not happen. We are only talking about $4.9 billion of this IMF funds, but we are not talking about the money that has been looted by these politicians throughout last 74 years. For example, I have this Auditor General's report which says around 18 trillion rupees of money have been obtained as loans, but only 3 trillion worth of assets are available. So what happened to those 15 trillion? So it's a question that I pose to the forum. So the country needs to stand up. We need to have a political wipeout, some kind of a change, some kind of a transformation.
Wipeout.
And we have to get ready for that. And it is not something, that is done through quotas or anything. We can start with quotas, but that should be naturally occurring in the society. So maybe youth, maybe women. So we have to, naturally, we have to rise up and we have to get ready for the change. So definitely we need an election. So that opportunity should be given to the public, and especially institutions like PAFTL, they are doing their best. So we have to somehow try to get these elections as early as possible. Especially, we look forward to a parliament election, but in case if we can't get that, at least the local government election should be given to the public, and that's how the democratic setup in the country could be saved.
Thank you very much, Arun. Moving on, Rehan, Jayavikrama. Did you work out those numbers? You can include that in your closing statement.
I'm going to start my clock just so that I get the minutes right and I give everyone an equal chance. So I'm going to go right now. Okay. So basically, Face the Nation is one of the most watched English programs, right, when it comes to politics and policy making, and there are a lot of people who watch your show. What does it tell you when I sort of have this new name? I call it the Sri Lanka Alijana Peramuna. So when you have representatives from those two parties not coming to a talk show, where they can actually get their voices out to the public for free, why do you think they're not doing it? The reason they're not doing it is because they know they can't. They don't have the answers. They don't have an answer to the unholy alliance that they created. They don't have an answer to the amount of cabinet ministers they made. They don't have answers to the disastrous budget they presented. And when you don't have answers to things like that, what do? You run and you hide. But I would like to give credit to the NPP. And Pafrel, as always, I think he's a legend when it comes to policy making and decision making with regard to elections. And they've done a lot of things when it comes to filing submissions in court and petitions in court, winning court cases, all that they do for the public, right? But you've got to give some sort of credit to the NPP also, because even though we are opposed to each other ideologically, we still come to these platforms. We don't fight amongst each other. We don't talk things that are not relevant to the subject. So why are we doing it? We are doing it because we want to keep the people of this country informed. We want to educate them better on how important elections are in this country. Now, when it comes to the SJB, we started something called the National Reform Secretariat. So I'm the assistant secretary of that secretariat. So it's one of the first times in the history of Sri Lankan politics that the opposition leader's office, which is also funded by the taxpayer, has started its own reform secretariat. So I'll tell you a bit about what it is. We're already on our 21st session. Last week it's every day on Monday, and I invite the journalists present, or even Mr. Rohana or Naushalya, or not really sure if he would come, but Arun would come, but I would invite you all to actually attend what it's about. It's at 2 p.m. every Monday at the opposition leader's office. So we've had it for about 20 days now. So like I said, the last week was cinnamon. So what we do is we get policy ideas on how to, rather than wait when you come into power, where you tell the people you're going to do this in 100 days, we are already formulating policy right now, so that by the time a SJB government comes into place, that all we got to do is to present it to cabinet. It hasn't been done before, and I want to invite Naushalya and Mr. Hettiarachchi and also Arun, hopefully, to come and see what it's about.
Rehan, you're overrunning on your time, Rehan.
Because I think policy is important, and I am done now, so thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you very much, Rehan. Moving on to Mr. Hettiarachchi. Get you 2 minutes now.
Yeah, the crisis which we are facing now is a man-made crisis. I mean, the responsible people are in the power. I mean, power in a sense, not only the ruling, even the opposition parties in certain extent, they also responsible, because they have been ruling the country over decades now. We are not the responsible. We are also responsible as a citizens, because we couldn't select the proper people into legislations. But I wish to appeal all the political parties which we are talking about now, the local elections. So in the present electoral system, people doesn't have a choice if the party doesn't select the good people. Because even the list, even the board-based list or a PR list, the party has to decide who will be in the list. So we appeal the political parties to select the best people among their cadres in the local level. If not, we will educate people how to vote in this upcoming elections. Actually, of course, we have introduced scorecard for voters to assess their candidate during elections. So we have been exercising the last last 2 elections. So we will have the separate program as March 12 movement, which are all about clean politics. We will start our education program. So we appeal the parties to select best people among their cadres for upcoming elections.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hettiarachchi. Quickly moving on to Attorney at Law, Naushalya Rajapaksa.
I think, like Mr. Hettiarachchi very correctly mentioned, this is a man-made crisis. So we need more women in power. I'm just kidding. So I think essentially what we need is, like Arun said, we need we need more women coming on board to sort of represent the majority population of this country. But certainly a quota system is a good entryway. But we need to think far. We need to think, okay, if I'm elected through a quota system this time, can I also be elected through a quota system the next time? Then if not, what sort of empowerment has my political party sort of given me, embedded in me, cultivated in me, for me to be able to contest in the next election, in whatever the election that might come May. So therefore, we need to think of, are the resources within this political party, is it being distributed amongst all people equally, amidst gender, amidst all sorts of differences that we have. And also, secondly, we need to speak of sensitivity in media. Sensitivity in media is very, very important, because media has a very big role to play in terms of promulgating female participation in politics, because media to date enables this stereotypical mindset that women are essentially homemakers and not necessarily policymakers. And I think media must be also held accountable to these sort of stereotypical norms that we still have in our head. And also thirdly, laws has to be sort of strengthened, especially in terms of campaign financing laws. We need to have caps sort of finalized, just so that women can have not just a smooth entrance, but also they could sustain in politics, and they could think of how best they could continue their practice and their work for the community in this field.
Thank you very much, Nausha Lair, and of course, affording opportunities to, very, very strong women like Nausha Lair, of course, is how we as a media network are trying to break this stereotype that women are only homemakers and not policymakers, and to show what brilliant policymakers like Nausha Lair that they can become, if she chooses to do so, which she has not chosen. Thank you very much, Nausha Lair, for joining us on our show. Thank you very much, Mr. Hettiarachchi. Thank you very much, Rehan. Thank you very much, Arun, for contributing to this amazing discussion. Thank you very much, Shanaya. Thank you, Jayamal. And thank you to our debutante, Mariam Gunivijaya. Thank you very much to our viewers for tuning in and, of course, trying to understand the dynamics behind this election. Of course, with the election coming up, there are people who say, what's the point in voting for these people? It's the same people who are going to come, but there is no viable alternative. But refusing to vote is not protest. It is surrender. Take care. God bless.